He was rich, cold, untouchable. His mansion was filled with gold, but his heart remained hollow. Staff came and went, doctors whispered behind closed doors, and hope was something he stopped buying long ago. His son had never walked a day in his life, a quiet child with tired eyes and legs that never listened. But then one night, through the hallway shadows, the millionaire heard a whisper and saw something he could never unsee. His paralyzed son standing, holding the hand of the new black maid. That moment shattered everything he believed about money, miracles, and motherhood. "Let's begin." The marble floors echoed with a chill that no heater could melt, and as the gates of the estate creaked shut behind his car, the millionaire loosened his tie and stepped into the silence he called home. It was a place of endless space, polished surfaces, and portraits that stared down like ghosts of past power. The walls were spotless, the staff obedient, the meals always on time, but love, that had long vanished. His son, Elijah, remained in the West Wing, tucked behind closed doors, surrounded by machines and routines and specialists who gave him reports instead of results. The boy was 12, silent, and broken, and though doctors called it a neurological curse, the father called it fate, another thing to manage, not mend. That evening, he arrived home earlier than usual, skipping the late-night meetings and charity galas that fed his ego more than his soul. Something felt off, not in a loud way, but in a whispering kind of wrong. A light was left on in the hallway near Elijah's room, dim but flickering, as if someone forgot it halfway. The millionaire paused near the spiral staircase, eyes narrowing. He called out, no answer. He heard the soft hum of a lullaby, not from a speaker, but from a human voice. That was new. Slowly, cautiously, he walked past the art gallery hallway, past the locked liquor cabinet, and stopped outside the room where he thought no miracles lived. There was no crying, no laughter, just the humming and a strange scent of freshly baked bread mixed with cocoa. He pushed the door slightly, not enough to be noticed, but enough to see. And what he saw made his breath catch. The new maid, a quiet woman they had barely interviewed, was sitting on the floor with Elijah. Not feeding him medicine, not reading charts, but holding his tiny, frail hand. No gloves, no barriers, just warmth. And Elijah, for the first time in forever, he wasn't staring at the ceiling, he was looking directly at her. Something stirred in the millionaire's chest. Something he hadn't felt in years. A whisper of emotion. A flicker of fear. Or maybe, the beginning of change. It started with a sound he couldn't place, a soft creak, like someone shifting weight on an old floorboard, followed by a faint exhale that didn't belong in the cold quiet of his mansion. The millionaire stood frozen in the hallway, one hand still on the doorframe, his senses heightened. It wasn't the sterile hum of medical machines or the robotic footsteps of a nurse. No, this was human, raw, alive. And then came the voice, a low, gentle whisper weaving through the cracks in the door like smoke. You are stronger than they think. He narrowed his eyes and leaned closer, barely breathing. A faint rustling followed, like fabric brushing marble, and then, a sound that shook him to his core. A tap. Then another. Soft. Staggered. Rhythmic. Like a heel hitting polished floor, followed by another. Couldn't be. His hand trembled as he pushed the door fully open, slowly, bracing himself for a lie, a delusion, a cruel trick of the mind. But it wasn't. There, just a few steps from his bed, Elijah stood, one hand clutching the arm of the maid, the other reaching toward the small plate of cookies she had brought him on a silver tray. His knees shook, his lips parted in wonder, and tears streaked down his pale cheeks. The maid, kneeling beside him with both arms open, wasn't saying anything now. She was just smiling. The millionaire's heart slammed against his ribs as the boy took one more step, wobbly, brave, defiant, and then collapsed safely into her arms. Not a fall, but a surrender. And she caught him like a mother who had been waiting all her life. Elijah? The millionaire breathed, barely recognizing his own voice. The maid looked up, startled but calm. He wanted to surprise you, she said softly. I didn't mean for you to see this yet. He couldn't speak, couldn't move. The sight of his son on the floor, after standing, was too much. All the doctors, the machines, the years of hopeless reports, undone by a woman who was paid to sweep the floor and dust the chandeliers. He swallowed hard. The silence was deafening now. How? He finally choked out, the word brittle in his mouth. The maid looked down at Elijah, then back up at him, and simply said, he just needed someone to believe he could. And with that one sentence, the world he built on logic, wealth, and resignation began to crack. He couldn't move. His jaw clenched, his throat dry as sand. The millionaire stared at the maid cradling his son like she belonged there, like she had always belonged there. The room, once sterile and silent, now pulsed with something terrifyingly unfamiliar. Life. His voice came out hoarse, strained by disbelief and something deeper, shame. Why are you doing this? He demanded, not out of anger but confusion, like a man seeing a ghost he never believed in. The maid looked up, her expression calm but unwavering, arms still wrapped around Elijah, who now leaned into her shoulder, exhausted but glowing. Doing what, sir? She asked gently. This, he said, gesturing wildly toward the boy. This miracle. This thing no one else could make happen. What are you trying to prove? Her eyes didn't flinch. I'm not trying to prove anything. I just saw a boy who needed to be touched, not treated, heard, not handled. The words pierced him. Elijah shifted, reaching toward his father with a trembling hand, but stopped halfway, unsure. The millionaire saw it, that hesitation, that fear. And it wasn't directed at the illness or the pain, it was at him. He was never supposed to walk, the millionaire whispered, as if reminding the universe of the deal they made. He's never stood before. Not like that. The maid nodded, her voice still soft but firm. Maybe because no one ever told him he could. Maybe he needed more than medicine. Maybe he needed love. The word echoed off the expensive wallpaper like a curse, and for a moment, the millionaire wanted to rage against it. Love had cost him everything once, his wife, his peace, his ability to trust. And now it was back, not through a doctor or a priest, but through this poor black maid who had slipped into his home quietly and turned everything upside down. Why you? He asked again, this time barely above a whisper. She looked at him with eyes full of pain and wisdom. Because I've been paralyzed too, she said. Not in body, in spirit. And someone once held my hand until I believed I could move again. I'm just passing it on. Elijah reached for her hand again. She took it. The millionaire watched as something tightened in his chest and then slowly, painfully began to unravel. Walls, once fortified by pride, started to crumble beneath the weight of one simple truth. Healing doesn't always wear a white coat. He stood in the dim light of his son's room, unable to look away from the fragile bond forming before him, between a boy he had tried to save with money and a woman who had only her heart to give. The millionaire turned and walked out, his breath shaky, his thoughts spinning like a storm. Down the hall, past the portraits of success, he found himself in his study, the one room untouched by staff, where he could pretend he was in control. But tonight, he wasn't. He poured a drink he didn't sip, and as the ice cracked in the glass, so did the memories. He remembered the night Elijah was born. How the doctors came in white coats with nervous smiles, how their voices lowered when they said complications. He remembered his wife's silent tears, the funeral 2 years later when cancer stole her, and the vows he made by her casket. I'll protect him, I'll fix this, I'll make it better. But he didn't. He hired the best caregivers, filled the house with specialists, and built a wing just for therapy. What he never did, what he never could, was sit down beside his son and hold his hand. He convinced himself love was in the funding, in the facilities, in the forms signed in triplicate. He convinced himself he was too broken to give more. The boy became a shadow, seen only through reports, progress charts, and silence. And then came the maid, young, poor, black, and beneath the radar of his elite filters. She was a late hire, a last-minute fill-in, someone the agency sent when no one else was available. He never even read her file. But she did something no one else dared. She saw the boy. Not the patient. Not the burden. Not the heir to a cold fortune. Just a child. And with nothing but stories, warmth, and food made with her own hands, she reached inside the cage Elijah had been locked in for years. The millionaire leaned against his bookshelf, eyes stinging. How did things get this bad? Because he had stopped believing in the human part of healing. Because he was afraid of being needed in ways money couldn't fulfill. And now, standing alone in his study, he finally saw it. The boy wasn't the only one who had been paralyzed. So was he. Just in a different way. And maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to move again. The house had never felt so loud in its silence. Every corner of the mansion whispered his failure. Every polished surface reflected not power, but guilt. The millionaire sat on the edge of his leather chair, elbows on his knees, staring into the fire that no longer gave him warmth. For years he had been applauded, respected, envied, a titan in the boardroom, a force in society with absence. Not with cruelty, but with cold indifference masked as professionalism. The boy had spent 12 years in that house, surrounded by luxury but starved of affection. He was fed meals by strangers, bathed by nurses, spoken to in therapeutic tones but never really spoken to. And all the while, the father who claimed to love him had kept a distance so wide, even a miracle couldn't bridge it. Until now. Until her. The maid. She came without fanfare, without credentials or letters after her name. She walked into the room not with authority, but with heart, and for reasons he still couldn't grasp, she saw value in a boy everyone had given up on, including his own father. The millionaire rose slowly and walked to the glass wall of his study. Outside, the garden lights flickered against the night sky. Somewhere beyond those hedges was the life he had built, a world of contracts, mergers, power plays. But inside, in a quiet room down the hall, was the life he had ignored, the only life that really mattered. His son. His flesh and blood. The boy who stood for the first time not because of science, but because someone believed in him. A tear slid down the millionaire's cheek, the first he had allowed himself in over a decade. I failed you, he whispered into the glass, his reflection staring back hollow and haunted. He thought of all the birthdays he missed, the bedtime stories he never read, the touch he withheld for fear of breaking something fragile. And yet, it wasn't his son who was fragile, it was him. And now, humbled and broken in the best possible way, he understood something he had spent a lifetime avoiding. Love isn't a weakness. It's the only thing strong enough to carry us when we can't walk alone. The next morning arrived not with alarms or appointments, but with a quiet sunrise seeping through velvet curtains, casting golden threads across the marble floor. The millionaire stood outside Elijah's room, heart pounding in a way it hadn't since his wedding day, holding something he hadn't touched in years, a tray. On it, 2 simple plates. Pancakes. Fresh strawberries. No chef, no silver covers, no garnish. Just food. Real food. He knocked once, gently, then opened the door. Elijah was awake, propped up on pillows, his legs tucked under a blanket. The maid sat beside him, braiding the fringe of his blanket absent-mindedly, like a mother waiting on her child's smile. Both looked up. Silence. The millionaire stepped in. I thought you might be hungry, he said, voice raw and stripped of all authority. The boy blinked, unsure. The maid offered a nod, her expression unreadable. He walked over and placed the tray on the bed between them. I made it, he added, almost embarrassed. But now, none of it mattered. Because for the first time in his life, he saw the truth. He had failed his son. Failed him not with malice, boo. Elijah looked at the food, then at his father, then back at the maid, who gave the softest, most encouraging nod. Slowly, the boy reached out, picking up a strawberry. It wasn't just a fruit, it was trust being tested. And when he bit into it, and smiled, the millionaire nearly broke. He sat beside the bed, not behind a desk, not behind a team, but right there beside his son. I know I haven't been good at this, he started, fumbling, his voice cracking. I was scared. Of doing it wrong. Of being too much, or not enough. So I stayed away. That was wrong. The maid didn't speak. She let him continue, letting him stumble through a confession more sacred than any sermon. But if you'll let me, Elijah, I want to fix this. Not just today. Every day. I want to be here. The boy said nothing. He didn't have to. His tiny hand moved across the blanket, reaching, not for food, but for him. The father. The man who was finally trying. He took the boy's hand in both of his, holding it with the gentleness of a man who knew what it meant to drop things that mattered. The maid looked away, eyes glassy. The silence in the room was no longer empty, it was full. Full of second chances. Full of something new being built, slowly, shakily, but real. And that was the first real step either of them had ever taken. The tray between them was simple, 2 plates, 2 forks, and a quiet promise. The millionaire had never sat this close to his son during a meal, never shared something so small that meant so much. Elijah picked at the pancakes cautiously, like each bite was a question. The maid sat on the armchair nearby, silently watching, hands folded in her lap, ready to disappear if needed. But no one told her to leave. No one wanted her to. The millionaire sliced a piece of pancake and placed it gently on Elijah's plate. The boy glanced at him, uncertain, then placed a piece on his father's in return. It wasn't grand, it wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Minutes passed like hours, filled with the sound of chewing and silverware clinking softly, but no one rushed it. They were building something fragile and hungry and desperately overdue. These are better than the chefs, Elijah said suddenly, voice raspy but full of something new, confidence. The millionaire chuckled, caught off guard. They're probably also undercooked, he replied, laughing lightly. Elijah smiled wider. The maid's lips curled into something proud and private. What's your favorite food? The father asked after a while, unsure how to speak to his son, unsure how to connect without questions that came with spreadsheets. Mac and cheese, the boy said. With ketchup. The millionaire winced playfully. You were doing so well. Elijah laughed, a soft, clear sound that filled the room like music, and the man who had built empires, broken deals, and stood on stages for applause now sat still, watching his son laugh, and knew he'd trade it all just to hear that sound again. Tomorrow, the millionaire said, we make mac and cheese. Ketchup and all. The boy nodded. It wasn't just food, it was a truce, a new tradition forming in real time. He glanced at the maid, who simply smiled and stood. I'll leave you to, she said gently. Thank you, the millionaire said, and this time, it wasn't just for the food. It was for everything. She walked out, leaving father and son alone, to broken souls slowly stitching something sacred together, not with grand speeches, but with bites of pancake and awkward laughter. For the first time in forever, the mansion felt like a home. Not because of what filled its walls, but because of who finally sat together within them. The next morning wasn't like any before it. There were no staff rushing through the halls, no chefs preparing an unnecessary buffet, no nannies speaking in soft rehearsed tones. The house was quiet, but not empty, it was intentional. The millionaire stood at the edge of the kitchen, sleeves rolled, stirring a bubbling pot of mac and cheese with a wooden spoon he hadn't used in years. Elijah sat at the island counter in his wheelchair, watching every move like it was a magic trick. "You are really doing it?" the boy whispered, eyes wide. "Told you I would," his father replied, glancing over with a smile that didn't feel forced for once. The maid entered quietly, carrying a stack of folded laundry, pausing when she saw them. The man turned, meeting her gaze. "You don't have to do that anymore," he said, walking over to her. "You are not the maid now. You are family." Her lips parted, stunned. "Sir." "Please. Don't call me that," he said, voice softening. "Call me just a father trying to be better." He turned back to Elijah. "This, what happened here, will never be undone. This house, it's his now. His joy, his peace, his childhood. And I'll protect it." He moved through the house like a man with a mission, unplugging machines that were more noise than help, calling the care agency to end contracts that only treated the boy like a client. "Effective immediately, we'll be keeping care in-house," he told the manager over the phone. "What does that mean, sir?" "It means," he said, glancing over at the maid and his son sharing a joke over spilled cheese, "that I finally understand what care really looks like." Later that day, he cancelled his quarterly trip to Geneva, declined 3 business meetings, fired the therapist who never once asked Elijah what he wanted. And then he did the unthinkable. He turned one of the mansion's largest guest rooms into a library playroom hybrid, filled with art supplies, board games, and an old upright piano. "He doesn't just need help," he said aloud to himself. "He needs to live." As they wheeled Elijah into the new room later that evening, the boy gasped at the colors, the music, the life. He turned to his father, eyes glistening. "You did this for me." "I did this for us," the man replied. And for the first time, he didn't just feel like a millionaire, he felt like a dad.